January 17, 1944, southern Italy. The hills around the Liri Valley were cold and silent, except for the far-off rumble of engines. Frost clung to the stone walls. German infantrymen of the 44th Division waited in half-frozen trenches, shoulders hunched against the biting wind, rifles pointed toward the mist. They had fought here for weeks. When they heard heavy vehicles moving through the fog, they braced for tanks. Probably Sherman's noisy but predictable. Yet the sound that approached was different. Each turn of the track, it was a rhythm of mechanical purpose lacking the chaotic clatter of a tank. Then came fire. Not a scattered burst, not the usual few shells to test a line, but a continuous roar. Out of the gray came short, squat machines bearing white stars. They were not tanks, they were guns on tracks. They were the M7 priests, and in the months to follow that sound, the M7 priest was born from America's answer to a simple problem. During the early years of the war, artillery was still a cumbersome beast, often being towed into position. The old methods worked in slow wars of static fronts, but the new war was one of blitzkrieg and rapid movement. Tanks and armored infantry could drive dozens of miles a day. By 1942, factories were converting the chassis of the M3 Lee tank into a new kind of weapon, a 105mm howitzer fixed inside an open-topped armored hull. It was a purely functional design. A tall, ring-shaped machine gun mount rose at the front, resembling a pulpit, and soldiers almost immediately began calling the vehicle a priest. Soon thousands were shipped to Africa. To the German soldier, it was not the priest's shape or armor that caused fear. It was the rhythm. Priests fired quickly and moved constantly. They became masters of the shoot-and-scoot tactic. Enemy observers who tried to target them found their coordinates useless minutes later. They operated in batteries of 4 to 6, driving into position, unleashing a storm of shells. Even the sound of their work was unsettling. German diaries frequently mentioned the steady voice of American guns that never seemed to sleep, a relentless pounding that ate away at nerves. A corporal near Anzio later wrote, "Their artillery rolls forward as if on an endless rail. It stops, the ground opens. Then it is gone again, its work done. We have nothing to shoot back at." This ghostly quality was a new and terrifying form of warfare. For men raised on the precision creed of the Wehrmacht, tight fire discipline, exact calculation, the endless abundance felt unreal. Every barrage seemed wasteful, profligate, yet it kept coming. By mid-1944, American factories were producing an almost unbelievable 3.15 million shells per month. When one priest fired 20 rounds, U.S. supply chains stretched across oceans but worked like clockwork. To the Germans, fighting with dwindling fuel and shrinking ammo stores, it appeared almost supernatural. They named the guns. The first large-scale appearance of the M7 priest came in North Africa in 1942. There it proved that mobility was as valuable as armor. The British, who received many under Lend-Lease. The priest was not built to duel with tanks. Its open top and thin armor made that suicidal. But to accompany infantry, break through defenses and crush resistance miles ahead of any static battery. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, more than 4,500 priests had been built. That number would double before war's end, ensuring every major American advance would be preceded. The German army had been trained to expect artillery as a separate branch, slow, heavy, and bound to its firing line miles behind the front. What they faced in Italy and France defied that. Allied artillery mounted on tracks advanced almost shoulder to shoulder with Sherman tanks. When one German bunker or machine gun nest fired, 3 shells from nearby priests would hit it. It was relentless, efficient, and terrifying. Reports from the 90th Panzer Grenadier Division described the American method as rolling fire that walks with the enemy. A creeping barrage. Factual records confirm how thoroughly this changed warfare. In the 6 months after D-Day, Allied forces fired more than 25 million rounds from self-propelled 105mm guns. The rate of fire averaged, because priests could move immediately after shooting, losses to counter battery fire were minimal. Their presence also transformed morale on their own side. U.S. infantrymen often wrote that they felt. Colonel Louis F. Lear of 2nd Corps noted early in the Italian campaign, "Infantry morale triples when priests are in support. It is belief made mechanical." That mechanical belief gave GIs confidence. The Germans encountered them first with curiosity, then dread. At Monte Cassino, prisoners spoke of artillery disguised as tanks. In Normandy, they called them factory guns. The phrase carried grudging respect. Throughout the campaign, one recurring object linked these battles: the small canned ration. Everywhere the Americans fought, they left piles of tin cans. Empty ration tins rolled across fields. The Germans noticed. They called the rations conserves, iron preserves, and joked bitterly that the Americans fought on meat and steel. Together, the can and the priest told a simple truth. When U.S. armored and infantry units rolled through France after June 1944, priests formed the unseen backbone of every major advance. At St. Lo, they fired near constant barrages that pulverized hedgerows. Even at night, the guns worked by muzzle flash and radio coordinate, never allowing the enemy a moment of peace. One French farmer remembered the ground trembling all night long. The German foot soldier learned to read the signs. First the distant engines, then the metallic chant of the tracks, then fire. In memoirs, many admitted this kind of warfare was something Germany. By then, the numbers themselves told the story. Ammunition consumption for one U.S. Army field division often exceeded 12,000 shells a day. Inside the priests, life was exhausting. 6-man crews. The open top left them exposed, yet it also kept the bore clear for faster loading. They slept in shifts, leaning on shell crates. Veterans described the gun's recoil as a kick from industry itself. Each of its 105mm shells weighed 33 lb. If a crew fired without pause for an hour, they expended roughly 8 tons of metal and explosive, and the trucks behind them would already be rolling. That reality struck the German high command harder than the guns themselves. Late war reports noted, almost in resignation, that enemy fire suggests no limit of supply on the Eastern Front. Historians now see it as one of the clearest signs of how America's industrial capacity turned ideological. Democracy had become a system not only of government but of engineering. When German commanders reported the collapse of their lines, they complained of firepower that moved too quickly. General Alfred Jodl admitted privately in 1945, "The Americans produce artillery." By March 1945, thousands of priests had crossed into Germany. Many fired their last rounds by the Rhine, illuminating the night. For the Germans still resisting, the sound was no longer foreign. When silence finally returned, what remained in those fields told its own story. Shell casings and hundreds of ration tins glittering in the mud. The M7 priest never carried the glory of a tank ace. What frightened the infantrymen was not just the gun's power, but the sense that it represented something endless. The symbol of the can returned in the war's aftermath, used by displaced civilians. The priest taught a generation that democracy's greatest strength was its ability to mobilize ordinary abundance into extraordinary purpose. The thunder that once shook trenches was the foretaste.